The neighborhood of Willowridge had always been quiet in the way small. American communities usually were early morning dog walkers, retired couples tending to flower beds, and families who waved at each other from driveways. For years, life there moved with a predictable rhythm. But beneath the calm surface, residents had begun to feel a tightening grip. A pressure that wasn't natural, a silent shift in power that no one fully understood yet. It started slowly, with small decisions, unexpected rule updates, and the rise of a homeowners association that grew from helpful overseer to unquestioned authority. Asterisk. The HOA board had once been made up of friendly volunteers who planned seasonal potlucks and made sure the neighborhood sign wasn't covered in weeds. But over time, as the older board members stepped down, new leadership emerged led by a woman named Marcia Collins. People didn't know much about her before she joined the board, but they learned quickly afterward. She arrived with confidence, posture stiff, binder always in hand, and a determination to remake the neighborhood into something she alone found acceptable. Asterisk under her oversight. The HOA began to change. Rules became stricter, violation notices arrived more frequently, and fines grew larger. Residents whispered about her late-night drive-through checks, her habit of photographing houses without permission, and her unannounced inspections of backyards. Word spread that she had pressured too long time residents to repaint their homes because she didn't like the shade of beige they had chosen. But these incidents were isolated enough that most people shrugged them off. After all, it was just an HOA. How bad could it really become? Asterisk Don and Eleanor Whitaker were among the residents who tried to ignore the gradual shift. They had lived in Willowridge for over a decade in a modest two-story home with blue shutters and a well-kept lawn. They had chosen the neighborhood precisely because it was peaceful. They paid their dues, maintained their yard, and kept to themselves. For years, they had no issues until the day a letter appeared on their doorstep. Asterisk, it was a violation notice, printed neatly and sealed in an official envelope. According to the board, their mailbox, a sturdy, freshly painted black box they had replaced the previous summer, was non-compliant due to unauthorized aesthetic modifications. They were confused. The mailbox looked like everyone else's, but confusion turned to frustration when they saw the attached fine. $150? Due in 10 days. Asterisk, they considered contesting it, but neighbors had warned them that appeals rarely went anywhere. The board always sided with itself. Some residents even suggested that questioning Marcia's decisions only made things worse. So the Whitakers reluctantly paid the fine, telling themselves it was a one-time issue. It wasn't. Weeks later came another notice, this time claiming that their trash bins were left visible for more than 2 hours past the permitted window, despite the bins being behind the side gate like always. Again a fine. And again they paid it, though with simmering irritation. Asterisk, but the letters kept coming, each one more absurd than the last. A violation for having a garden hose coiled improperly. A warning that their backyard flower bed contained unauthorized plant species, even though the flowers were native to the region. A demand that they remove a small wooden bench under their tree because it obstructed the uniform appearance of the neighborhood. Asterisk, after months of this, their patience wore thin. They began comparing notes with neighbors and discovered they weren't alone. Nearly everyone had received notices for violations that made no sense at all. The fines were piling up across the community, and oddly enough, all payments were directed to a new HOA improvement fund, managed exclusively by Marcia and her closest board members. Rumors spread that the money wasn't going toward improvements at all, that it was being used for personal gains. Though no one had proof, asterisk residents felt powerless. Some were retired and living on fixed incomes, forced to pay fines they couldn't afford. Others feared retaliation if they challenged the board. A few families quietly listed their homes for sale, but potential buyers backed out after reviewing the HOA's recent enforcement history. The neighborhood, once admired, was slowly being strangled by the very group meant to protect it. Asterisk. Then came the event that pushed everything over the edge. Asterisk, one afternoon, while Don was at work and Eleanor was tending to their front yard, a white SUV pulled into their driveway unannounced. Two HOA board members, along with Marcia herself, stepped out. Without acknowledging Eleanor, they began photographing the exterior of the home from every angle: front porch, garage door, roofline, even the backyard gate. When Eleanor approached them, they brushed past her as though she were invisible, jotting notes in clipboards and pointing at random spots around the property. They stayed for nearly half an hour. And when they finally left, they said nothing, no explanation, no notice, no courtesy. Just silence. That evening, the Whitakers found not one but 3 new violation letters taped to their front door. One fined them for unsightly lawn edging, another for inconsistent shutter coloration, and the third stated that their home required a mandatory aesthetic compliance inspection, which they were required to pay for upfront nearly $500. It was too much. Something inside them snapped. They weren't just being monitored, they were being targeted. And the worst part was that this wasn't just happening to them. The entire neighborhood was being slowly suffocated by fear and control. Eleanor visited neighbors that night, going door to door, and found the same story repeated at every house. Unjust fines, threats of liens, demands for payments that seemed designed to break people. One resident, an elderly man named Robert, had even received a foreclosure warning from the HOA over accumulated fines he couldn't pay. The board had taken his case to court without ever notifying him directly. The situation had gone far beyond strict rule enforcement. This was abuse of power. This was manipulation, exploitation, and fear used as currency. Word spread quickly through Willowridge that enough was enough. Homeowners were tired, angry, and ready to push back. For the first time, they saw that their strength didn't lie in silence. It lay in unity. By the end of the week, a group of residents gathered in the Whitakers' living room, filling the space with folding chairs, notebooks, and the tense energy of people who had finally reached their breaking point. They were determined to uncover the truth, expose the corruption, and take back their neighborhood, but as they prepared to challenge the HOA, they had no idea how far the board, especially Marcia, was willing to go to maintain control. And what they were about to uncover would shake Willowridge to its core. The meeting in the Whitakers' living room marked the first time residents had gathered as a united force. But unity didn't erase fear. Many of those sitting in the folding chairs still glanced toward the windows as if expecting an HOA member to be listening from the street. Years of intimidation had conditioned them to stay small, stay quiet, and stay compliant. But as the night grew darker, something else began to grow to resolve. Don had covered the coffee table with neatly organized violation notices collected from neighbors. The stack had grown so large it nearly sagged under its own weight. Some were legitimate concerns twisted into excessive fines, while others were so absurd they bordered on comedic. A notice claiming someone's grass was too enthusiastically green. A warning that a resident's welcome mat was overly decorative. Demand that a family remove a holiday wreath because it set an unapproved seasonal tone. But what caught the group's attention most wasn't the absurdity. It was the pattern. Every fine issued in the past 18 months, without exception, directed payments into the same improvement fund, which operated separately from the community maintenance account. The improvement fund required no receipts, submitted no reports, and allowed Marcia to sign off on expenditures without oversight. That alone was suspicious, but combined with the sudden surge of fines, it suggested something far more sinister. The residents started to speak up one by one. An elderly widow explained how she drained her savings trying to keep up with fines she didn't understand. A young couple described receiving threats of legal action just weeks after moving in. A disabled veteran shared that the HOA had attempted to place a lien on his home, despite his having proof he'd already paid the fines they claimed were overdue. Every story layered onto the last until frustration grew into something heavier, sharper, and more determined. The group agreed. If they wanted answers, they needed proof. Actual documentation, not rumors. Financial records, board meeting transcripts, expenditure logs, anything that could expose what the HOA was hiding. But gaining access to those documents would be difficult. The board had recently changed the bylaws, declaring financial records restricted to board members only, a decision that conveniently took place during a meeting residents weren't invited to, asterisk still. The community decided there was one advantage they had: numbers. Enough signatures could force a recall vote. Enough complaints filed simultaneously could draw the attention of state regulators. Enough pressure could crack the facade the had spent years building, asterisk, but unity alone wasn't enough. They needed strategy, asterisk. Over the next several days, residents worked quietly but purposefully. People who barely knew each other before were now coordinating in secret group chats, sharing updates, comparing paperwork, and advising each other on how to avoid triggering further HOA retaliation. A retired attorney volunteered to review their documents. A tech-savvy teenager created digital backups of everything residents had received from the board. A former accountant began mapping out the timelines of fines and comparing them with HOA financial claims, asterisk. All their efforts painted a troubling picture, but still lacked the missing piece: the actual financial data from the improvement fund. That piece arrived unexpectedly. One morning, a message appeared in the neighborhood chat from an anonymous source. It claimed to be from someone within the HOA office who had grown uncomfortable with what they witnessed. Attached were several photos showing invoices, bank transfers, and handwritten notes. Not official documents, but enough to suggest misuse of funds, asterisk specifically. Multiple payments from the improvement fund had gone to a luxury interior design company, a landscaping service located 2 towns away, and a boutique home renovation contractor, none of which had ever performed work in Willowridge, asterisk. Rumors erupted immediately. Some believed the funds were being used to remodel Marcia's home. Others suspected bribes to maintain loyalty within the board. The truth wasn't clear, but everything pointed in one direction. The HOA was taking money that belonged to the community and funneling it elsewhere. Asterisk, the anonymous whistleblower promised more information but warned the residents to act quickly. According to them, the board was planning something drastic: an emergency meeting that would implement harsher enforcement policies and grant the authority to escalate fines directly to collection agencies. If passed, these rules would make challenging the HOA nearly impossible. Asterisk. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Friday evening. Asterisk. Word spread like wildfire. But the board announced the meeting with just enough notice to comply with their modified bylaws, ensuring only a handful of residents would realistically attend. The rest would be kept in the dark, or so the board thought. The Whitakers group devised a plan. Residents would show up early, filling every seat before the board arrived. Others would stand outside with phones ready to record everything. A few had prepared detailed timelines of fines and questionable expenditures, ready to read aloud if the board tried to silence them. Asterisk. They weren't going to let the HOA pass another rule without scrutiny. Asterisk. Friday evening came quickly. The sun dipped behind the roofs of Willowridge as residents walked toward the community hall in tense silence. For years, that building had hosted neighborhood potlucks, Easter events, and movie nights. But tonight it felt different, like a battleground waiting to erupt. Asterisk. The doors opened at 6. Within minutes, every chair was filled and people stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls. When the board members entered, they froze in surprise. They had expected half a dozen compliant attendees at best. Not a full house buzzing with quiet determination. Asterisk. Marcia walked in last. Her binder clutched tightly, her expression flickering between irritation and confusion. She moved to the front with her usual authority, but for the first time, she sensed the room wasn't hers to control anymore. Asterisk. The meeting began stiffly, with the board attempting to rush through the agenda, but residents refused to be silenced. They demanded explanations. They demanded transparency. They demanded answers to the fines, the secret fund, and the questionable expenditures. Asterisk. Tension crackled like static in the air as the board attempted to assert authority. But every attempt was met with united resistance. The usual fear that once filled the room had evaporated. replaced by righteous anger. It was then that something unexpected happened. One of the board members, an older man known for his loyalty to Marcia, suddenly stood up. He looked tired, defeated, and worn down by secrets he could no longer carry. Without warning, he revealed what many had suspected: the improvement fund was being misused. Not by him or the other members, by Marcia. Large sums of money had been transferred to accounts she controlled, and board meetings had been manipulated to keep her actions hidden. The room fell silent. Marcia's expression hardened, her composure slipping as panic crept into her eyes. She tried to interrupt, to discredit him, but the residents were no longer listening to her. The truth had finally surfaced, but the fight was far from over. Exposure alone wasn't enough. The residents knew that Marcia would not surrender control easily. And now that she realized the neighborhood was turning against her, she would do anything to maintain her power. The battle for Willowridge had shifted, and the final confrontation was about to begin. The following week in Willowridge was unlike anything the residents had experienced. News of the emergency meeting and the whistleblower's revelations spread quickly through social media, neighborhood apps, and word of mouth. For the first time in years, fear gave way to collective action. People who had once stayed behind closed doors now discussed strategies openly, swapping stories of unjust fines and documenting every questionable interaction with the HOA. Marcia Collins, sensing the walls closing in, attempted a counterattack. She sent letters warning residents that attending future meetings without authorization could be considered trespassing or harassment. She threatened to impose maximum fines on anyone who disrupted the board's operations. And she began a public relations campaign, posting carefully curated photos of herself overseeing neighborhood improvements, while painting herself as a committed leader. But the residents had already seen behind the curtain. They weren't fooled. The Whitakers and their core group became the organizing force of the resistance. They created a detailed record of fines, suspicious fund transfers, and procedural irregularities. Copies were distributed to every household, so even residents too fearful to attend meetings could arm themselves with knowledge. A local attorney volunteered to help draft a formal complaint to the state HOA Oversight Board, detailing financial mismanagement, abuse of authority, and intimidation tactics. The residents also began attending every board meeting en masse, documenting everything with phones and cameras. The more the community rallied, the more desperate Marcia became. She began sending individual letters to residents, pressuring them to adhere to rules, while simultaneously attempting to divide the community by questioning loyalties and spreading rumors. But her tactics backfired. The neighborhood, once fragmented and cautious, had become a single, unified force. One Saturday morning, the residents organized a formal petition. Every signature was collected with precision and care, creating an undeniable record of opposition to Marcia and the board. They submitted the petition to the HOA offices and to the local government oversight authorities. Alongside it, they submitted an exhaustive file containing photographic evidence, copies of violation notices, bank statements, and the whistleblower's documents. The scope of the evidence left no room for denial. The HOA had been abusing its authority for years, misappropriating funds and harassing residents. As word of the investigation spread, local media picked up the story. Headlines ran in regional papers. Willowridge homeowners stand up against overbearing HOA. Residents expose misuse of funds, demand justice. HOA corruption under fire. Suddenly, Marcia's careful facade of control cracked in full view of the public. Neighbors who had remained silent began speaking openly to reporters, recounting months of intimidation, fines, and harassment. The narrative of fear was replaced by a narrative of courage, under the mounting scrutiny. The HOA board convened a so-called emergency session to address the accusations. The room, which had once been an intimidating arena where Marcia wielded unchecked authority, was now a courtroom of public accountability. Attorneys representing residents presented detailed timelines, evidence of financial mismanagement, and first-hand accounts of harassment. They made it clear that Marcia's actions were not only unethical but potentially illegal. Marcia attempted to defend herself, speaking in clipped tones and referencing bylaws she had manipulated to her advantage. But each argument was countered with evidence, every misstatement corrected with proof. The unity of the residents made her rhetoric powerless. The weight of collective knowledge was unstoppable. By the following week, action had been taken. State authorities opened a formal investigation into the Willowridge HOA. The improvement fund was frozen, and Marcia's authority was immediately suspended pending a full audit. Board members who had been loyal to her found themselves forced to cooperate, some admitting they had been complicit out of fear, others expressing relief that the truth had finally emerged. The residents were cautious but hopeful. They knew the process would take time, and they understood that legal battles could stretch for months. But for the first time in years, they felt a sense of empowerment. They weren't just victims, they were a community demanding accountability. In the aftermath, Willowridge began to change. The HOA's leadership was restructured, with a new board elected from the residents themselves, chosen for integrity and transparency. New bylaws were drafted to prevent future abuse, requiring that all financial records be publicly accessible and that residents be notified of changes in advance. Fines became fair and clearly explained, no longer used as tools of intimidation. The neighborhood slowly returned to the warmth and camaraderie it had once known. Don and Eleanor Whitaker were recognized by their neighbors for their courage and persistence, though they insisted they had only done what was necessary to protect their community. Their living room, once the site of whispered fears, became a symbol of resistance, a place where residents had first found the courage to stand together. Over time, stories of the rebellion spread to neighboring communities. Willowridge became an example, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked HOA authority, and also a testament to the power of residents who refused to remain silent. They had learned a vital lesson: vigilance, documentation, and unity could topple even the most entrenched figures of authority. Even Marcia Collins, once untouchable, faded from public view. The investigation concluded with fines imposed against her personally, removal from any HOA position, and restrictions preventing her from holding a similar post in any other community association. Her attempts to regain influence were met with resistance and awareness born from the Willowridge example. The community she had tried to control had reclaimed its power and would never let it go again. The Whitakers, along with the other residents, worked tirelessly to rebuild the neighborhood spirit. Yard signs celebrating community unity appeared. Monthly gatherings returned, not as meetings under fear, but as celebrations of togetherness. Children played safely in the streets once more. Homeowners, formerly anxious and cautious, now felt a renewed sense of ownership and responsibility, not just for their homes, but for the shared life of their neighborhood. Looking back, residents realized that Willowridge had survived because they refused to accept intimidation. They had documented everything, stood together in the face of abuse, and demanded accountability. The battle had been long, exhausting, and fraught with uncertainty, but it had been worth it. The story of Willowridge became a quiet legend in the region. Homeowners from other communities reached out, asking how they had done it, hoping to replicate the courage and strategy of a neighborhood that had refused to be bullied. Willowridge, once a quiet community overshadowed by fear, became a beacon of empowerment, showing that even the most overbearing authority could be challenged when people united with knowledge, courage, and determination. As the sun set over the neatly kept lawns, children laughed in the yards, neighbors waved to one another from driveways, and the once feared HOA office sat empty, a reminder of a lesson learned: no amount of authority could overcome the collective strength of a community that refused to be silenced. The neighborhood had been tested, and it had passed. Willowridge would never again allow fear to dictate its rules. Residents had reclaimed not just their homes, but their voices, and in doing so, had written a story of resistance, justice, and triumph that would be remembered for years to come.